Hey everybody, welcome to this workshop on the intersection between narcissism and empathy. This workshop is called The Narcissist and Empath, Trauma Bonding, Codependency, and Healing Through Authenticity. So I want to talk a bit about the inspiration behind creating this because I work predominantly with highly sensitive people and empaths, and they have innately and organically a high sense of empathy. And what I find is that these people tend to attract, when they're disempowered, they attract people on the narcissistic personality spectrum. Um, and I wanted to create some sort of resource that embodies pretty much everything: the trauma bonding, the codependency, the healing that's required in order to move away and stop attracting this type of personality structure. Yeah, sit back and relax. This is going to be a bit of a longer video, so if you need to go make a tea or something, put this on pause and come back and we will get started. All right. So first off, is this you? Is this workshop for you? Do you keep attracting narcissistic people into your life? Do you abandon yourself to secure connections with others? And do you have a hard time communicating your needs in relationships? These are going to be three really important factors that are going to likely make you a good candidate to continue watching this video, but will make you susceptible to attracting people on the narcissistic personality spectrum. All right, so this workshop will explore what trauma bonding is, what codependency is, and why empaths easily fall into this type of relationship dynamic, why the narcissist and the empath are drawn to each other, why authenticity is the anecdote to these toxic relationships, the art of taking responsibility, and how the law of attraction is always working in your favor for your greatest spiritual evolution. So lots to unpack here. This is going to be a great workshop. I'm excited to continue. So let's start with what is trauma bonding. So trauma bonding is essentially a relationship dynamic where a person remains bonded in an unhealthy relationship that is characterized by manipulation, invalidation, and abuse. Those are the three characteristics of a trauma bonding relationship: manipulation, invalidation, and abuse. Having to work to maintain a partner's interest, fear of loss or abandonment are usually what keep the person in a toxic relationship with trauma bonding. So the narcissistic person is going to prey on your fear of abandonment or loss and keep you drawn in to the relationship. And it's important to note that childhood trauma involving neglect, abuse, abandonment can impact the person's attachment style and disturb their view of what a healthy relationship is. So oftentimes, people with a disturbed attachment are going to confuse love and abuse. So if we grew up in a household where there was a ton of neglect or abuse, and basically neglect can be viewed as not getting your emotional needs met too. And if you were neglected emotionally, what happens is we develop a tolerance to that as an adaptation in childhood, and we start to see that as our norm. And then when we get it, when we're in adulthood, when we're in relationships and our emotional needs are going unmet, it's almost like we can't recognize it. We don't have the ability to see it as a red flag because it's what we've always known. So this is what makes us really susceptible to being, victims of narcissistic abuse, but also staying stuck in these trauma bonding relationships. So the 8 relationship characteristics of a trauma bond, according to Dr. Ramani, who is one of the I would say the leaders in this space, in exploring the impacts of narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. So the first one is justification. So excusing toxic behavior. So giving the person you're in a relationship with permission slips to treat you poorly and constantly justifying their behavior. Believing the future faking. So false promises. That's usually how the narcissistic person will keep you in the relationship, is promising, if you do, start to call them out, they'll be like, well, I promise that things will change and it will get better. And it tends to not get better. Having the same fight over and over again. So it's called repetition compulsion. Mystical or magical thinking about the partner. So that kind of like that, there's just something about them and I can't explain it, right? And it's usually, in my opinion, an activated attachment system, right? So our anxious attachment's been activated, and because we grew up feeling a lot of that anxious attachment, we confuse that for love. The fear of leaving. So self-doubt about being wrong. So, we hold on to maybe some of the good things about the relationship, and we have a fear of leaving because what if we're, we almost gaslight ourselves. What if we're wrong? Becoming a one-stop shop for their partner. So being their everything. So not having friends, losing your social connections, maybe not working anymore, that sort of thing. And your partner has this form of control over your whole life. Hiding your feelings and needs, and rationalizing the relationship to others. So these are 8 really important things to notice. If they're exhibited in your relationship, you might want to evaluate if this is, if you're in a trauma bonding relationship. Okay, so what is codependency? Codependency can be defined as any relationship in which 2 people become so invested in each other that they can't function independently. So what this does is it contributes to a lack of sense of self. So usually for people to get into codependent relationships, there's already a lack of sense of self. There's an underdeveloped, authentic sense of self. And we look for our sense of self outside of our relationships. There's usually characteristics of excessive caretaking, a victim and a savior dynamic. So you have oftentimes the empath is the person moving toward the other person as the savior. So I will save you, I will heal your emotions. And that is the currency that the narcissistic person is using to keep you around, because they're giving you a sense of purpose that you're saving them. And next one is manipulation to get needs met, right? That's one of the characteristics of narcissism, is that there's a lot of exploitation and manipulation. But it can go both ways, right? The empath can also be manipulating to get their needs met as well. Justifying or taking responsibility for others' actions. And oftentimes codependency is usually characterized by the mantra like, my worth is in my relationships, not within me, right? So we're constantly working for our worth. We're hustling for our worth. And that's a strong red flag that you're in a codependent relationship. If you have to work for your worth outside yourself and you don't have a sense of worthiness within yourself. Okay, so let's look at what narcissism is. So it's really important to note that narcissism, I hear this a lot with people. It's like, oh, my ex was a narcissist. And it's like almost every other person I talk to, their ex is a narcissist. And I'm just like, is this actually legit? Or is it like, just because somebody exhibits a lack of empathy towards you and that's your perception, it doesn't make them a narcissist. Okay, so I really want to highlight that. People can have narcissistic traits. But in order for somebody to be categorized as having like a personality disorder, of narcissistic personality disorder, it has to be characterized by this criteria, right? Which the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for diagnostics, right? For diagnosing mental health, really. And narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder. So it's a pervasive pattern of grandiosity. So in fantasy or behavior, there's a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, beginning by early childhood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following criteria. So it has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without consummate achievements. is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions, requires excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations, is interpersonally exploitative, so takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends, lacks empathy, is willing to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, is often envious of others or believes that the others are envious of him or her, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So essentially, if you're looking at an easy way to see if there's narcissism present with you, either within yourself or others, it's characterized by the 3 E's. So lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation. So it's really tough to diagnose due to a lack of self-reporting, self-awareness, and shame around it. And it's also important to note that narcissism isn't a clinical term. It is a descriptor for a set of personality traits. Narcissistic personality disorder requires self-reported disturbances in 2 major domains, so social and occupational. And that's actually a big reason why it's really underreported and undiagnosed, is because the person has to come forward with the strain in either their social relationships or issues at work or something like that, and a lot of people don't. So there is an underreporting in the world, but I also do think that there is an over-reporting of people thinking that all people are narcissists because they treated them poorly, right? So it's definitely important to understand that criteria, so really what true narcissistic personality disorder looks like. Okay, so let's explore why empaths easily fall into codependency. Many empaths, if not all empaths, feel deeply. They tend to focus on others' feelings as a way to not feel their own. And when I say this, I'm talking about a disempowered empath, somebody who hasn't done their healing. They're still exhibiting attachment issues, maybe from trauma in childhood. They're still exhibiting codependent relationship patterning. So when this is present, many empaths tend to focus on others' feelings as a way to not feel their own feelings, because it's a distraction. And a lot of us learned in childhood that if we care for, whether it was a sick parent or an emotionally volatile parent, if we cared for them and we were the peacemaker in the house, that we would get our needs met. We would be seen, right? So codependency and caretaking are really strong relationship patterns within the empath, because it's how we learned to adapt to our environment when we were younger. And a lot of us as empaths are healers, right? We heal. So when we saw dysfunction in our upbringing, we wanted to be there to help heal, right? Even if we were young and unable, like, to be able to make sense of it, I think we still were exhibiting those desires to want to take care and heal. So this preoccupation with others is where we learn to abandon self, and it usually happens in childhood. We start self-abandoning from a very young age because we need to, in order to be seen, in order to be heard, in order to get our needs met. We find value and worth in being caretakers for others. And we may have an underdeveloped sense of self due to spending most of our time outside of ourselves, that we need others to show us who we are. This is an important one to note, because if we do abandon ourselves and we spend a lot of our time outside of ourselves and in the emotions of others, we are not, for every minute that we're not with ourselves, that's a minute taken away from us to be able to develop our authentic sense of self, right? So that's why a lot of empaths that are disempowered are emotionally immature for their own self, being able to understand their own emotions and their own needs and their own boundaries and their own desires, because they haven't spent enough time with themselves to understand these things. This makes somebody very susceptible to narcissistic abuse, because they don't have a sense of self, and a sense of self is basically there's a major correlation between having an authentic sense of self and being resilient and resistant to narcissistic abuse. Okay, so let's explore why narcissists and empaths are drawn to each other. Many narcissists are wounded from trauma and shame in their childhood, where they likely experience little to no empathy. So oftentimes people think that narcissists are just these really horrible, evil people, and they were born psychopathic and that sort of thing. And sure, that is true in some cases, and but in most cases, narcissistic people are just extremely wounded people who never got seen, heard, valued, validated, attuned to emotionally in their childhood. So they shut off their emotions. They became basically extremely emotionally repressed and dissociated. And this is likely where the narcissism is coming from. Empaths are the perfect fit for a narcissist to fill their deep desire to feel seen, heard, and understood, right? Think about what what empaths do. We nurture, we care for, we attune to, we transmute the emotions of others. We transmute density in energy, right? So this is perfect for the narcissistic person to feel like their needs are being met, but they don't know how to get their needs met in healthy ways because they're shut off emotionally. They probably don't even know what their needs are, and they don't know how to communicate and be vulnerable because vulnerability led to pain in their childhood. So they go about it through exploitation, manipulation, and entitlement. So oftentimes empaths process others' emotions for them, right? We are there to help transmute density of emotion, and we're there to, oftentimes people say after they hang out with me or other empaths, they'll be like, "Oh, I feel so good after I hang out with you." It's because we're really good at making people feel good and light, and we're helping elevate the consciousness of humanity, which means we're transmuting dense energy. Empathy becomes enabling when we lack boundaries within our delivery of empathy. So that's important to note. Empathy becomes enabling when we lack boundaries within our delivery of empathy. So empathy, once delivered to somebody, it feels good for them, so they can become addicted to it. They can want it from us, and then that's when that whole psychic vampire energy comes out, and other people are leeching or siphoning our energy, is because we don't have boundaries, right? And most of these boundaries I'm talking about, yes, there's physical boundaries at play here, but I'm talking more about energetic boundaries. Is how do I protect my energy and not allow people to just take whatever they want from me energetically? So with a narcissist, forgiveness driven by empathy that lacks boundaries becomes enabling. This is where the empath is exposing themselves to victimization. So when you're dealing with a narcissist and they cross your boundaries and they start to manipulate you, and you catch on to it and you say, okay, no more, I'm done, and you block them, and then you start to enter that space of empathy where you're misusing your empathy, and you're like, well, they were hurt as a child, and they have so much trauma, and I feel like it's my responsibility to be there for them, and and you start to misuse your empathy, and you start to forgive them, by and then unblocking them and connecting with them again. So when we are lacking boundaries and we're not seeing something with complete clarity, we're going to continue to put ourselves in that situation. So what you're doing is you're actually using your own empathy to gaslight yourself, and that needs to stop, right? So if somebody's willing to hurt you once or twice, then you don't need to keep going back, right? And that's where it's important to set boundaries and to be willing to stand in your boundaries with consistency, right? It's one thing to set boundaries, but it's another thing to be consistent with them and to uphold your boundaries over time, right? And that's a really important thing to note. And the reason why I think a lot of us as empaths misuse our empathy is because we don't like it when other people are disappointed in us or when other people are hurt by us. And that is something we have to get better at. And we have to be willing to tolerate other people's disapproval and discomfort. So empathy works best when it is a two-way street. Narcissists tend to not have the empathic development to be able to reciprocate. They did not learn how to have empathic or empathy to be able to reciprocate. So we need to understand that, right? The healing for a narcissistic person is to go on a long journey of doing a deep, deep attachment trauma healing work and learning how to develop empathy, because if they took themselves offline emotionally at a very young age due to trauma, they didn't have the ability to be able to develop empathy, because your emotions have to be online to develop empathy, right? So this is a big, big thing. So they almost have to go back and do a lot of deep inner child work in order to be able to develop empathy to get to that point where they can therefore reciprocate. And that's not something you can do for them. Okay. The empath often believes that if you show someone enough empathy, they will eventually come around and begin to reciprocate. It does not work that way. Okay. You cannot love somebody or have enough empathy for somebody to change them, right? That is an inside job. They have to do that work. And that's another vulnerability of ours as empaths, that the narcissistic person will prey on, is our rose-colored glasses, our belief that people can eventually heal and get good at something if we just love them through it enough, right? That's not the case in this situation. A person must heal their shame and trauma before they can access their empathy for another. Really important. Empathy is the anecdote to narcissism. Like I said earlier, many narcissists try to use empaths to feel better about themselves, but they are doing it through the ego, not the heart. So they, again, have to, if you talk to any clinician or anybody that's working with narcissistic people, it's like, you got to do that deep healing, that childhood trauma healing work, and then you have to start training empathy. That really is the anecdote to narcissism. Okay, so why is authenticity the anecdote to these toxic relationships? For us, for empaths and highly sensitive people, authenticity is the anecdote. And let me tell you why. So let's start off by talking about what authenticity is. So there's many characteristics of what authenticity is, and it's a bit of a buzzword. Everybody's using it now, and but there are legitimate things that define what authenticity is. So living in congruence with who you are is really important. So your insides match your outsides, right? That's really important. You're in alignment with your meaning and your purpose. So you know what you're meant to be doing on this planet and you're executing it. You're in alignment of your shadow and your light. And what I mean by that is you've integrated your shadows. You know that you have shortcomings. You know you have things that you don't like about yourself, and you are not hiding those parts of yourself behind masks or facades anymore. You're self-possessed, meaning that you don't conform to what everybody else is doing just because they're doing it. So your main MO now is not fitting in, right? Self-possession is the opposite of fitting in. You're like, okay, everybody's doing this. I don't really feel aligned to that. I'm not going to do it. That's authenticity. You're genuine. You're listening to your intuition, and you're embodied to a certain degree. And because the intuition and in my opinion, our authenticity is an energy, and it's always informing us in any moment what is authentic to us. So oftentimes I'll even say that authenticity is the exploration and the embodiment of our desires, right? So whenever we have something that comes up and it's like, oh, I desire to do this, or I desire to express myself in this way, we say yes. We allow that expression to come forward. That is authenticity. So authenticity leads to greater self-awareness, and greater self-awareness will keep you resistant to gaslighting, love bombing, and other behaviors that narcissists exhibit. So gaslighting is about trying to trick you into thinking the way they think, or trying to trick you into not listening to your own intuition, right? Love bombing is like excessive amounts of showing up and giving you flowers and making you feel so good and making you think that you're in this fairy tale, Cinderella love story. And then that's when the manipulation and the exploitation starts to take place. So when we are self-aware, we are trusting of ourselves. right? We're like, wow, like I know that I would never think like that, or I know I would never do that. So like, I'm not gonna, there's no way. So somebody who's authentic and self-aware, it's impossible to gaslight them because they're strongly connected to their intuition. They know what's true and they know what's not true. The self-possessed nature of authentic people will give them the self-respect and self-worthiness to walk away from a relationship that isn't meeting their needs. This is so critical, because if you keep going back to that same trauma bond, to that same narcissistic abusive relationship, you know there's an element of you that does not hold yourself in high regard. You have a perhaps low self-worth. You don't respect yourself because you're continuing to go back into these relationships, right? So when you're self-possessed and you just are listening to yourself and you know that you're worthy and you respect yourself, you're going to walk away from these relationships. So speaking your truth and standing in your truth is what will make you resistant to attracting narcissistic people, because when the narcissistic person can't gaslight you, you are no longer easily manipulated and they have no use for you. Okay. So I've had these people come into my life, narcissistic people. And actually recently I've had somebody come into my life and they come in really hot and heavy and they're like, you're amazing. I love you so much. And all, and they're just bring this energy. And it's like, wow, at first it feels really good. But then you start to notice, you start to pick up on like, excessiveness, their lack of boundaries, that sort of thing. And when you start to speak your truth and you start to call out those behaviors instead of just like letting them pass, like, calling out red flags will very quickly lead a narcissistic person away from you, right? When you start to just really speak your truth and say, oh no, you're not meeting that need for me, sorry, like I'm not doing that, right? They will go the other way because they know that there's no need for you. They can't manipulate you. That's the key. So it takes a lot of work to become authentic, because we have to care a lot less about what others think about us. That's really important. And that's why a lot of us don't speak our truth, because we're worried about hurting people. We're worried about people judging us. We're worried about rejection. And if we want to be authentic, we have to be willing to tolerate those experiences, right? And as empaths, it makes it a little bit extra hard for us because we feel what others feel about us, right? We feel disappointment, we feel disapproval, we feel the fear in others. So when we create an uncomfortable experience for somebody else, it really hits us hard. But again, that's the tolerance, right? And the work here is to become good at regulating your own emotions, because you're not really feeling the emotions in others. Your mirror neurons are activated and you're feeling your own emotions. So when somebody's disappointed, your mirror neurons get activated, and we have a lot more of them as empaths. Then we have to be with our own feelings, right? So get good at emotion regulation and you'll get good at authenticity. And I just wrote down here, an authentic empath is a rock star. They've done the deep work to get to the place of authenticity, right? And I just think it's amazing when I see an empath that's empowered and authentic. I'm like, I know you have done some deep work to get to this place. So kudos to all you authentic, empowered empaths out there. And if that's not you, then there's some work to be done. Yes, but it's very possible. And this is the work I do. This is the work I do with people. So if you're feeling this stuff and you're really wanting to getting to that place, reach out and we can set up a private coaching consult. Okay, so why is authenticity the anecdote to these toxic relationships? Caretaker energy attracts wounded people who need to be taken care of, right? When we're in that energy and we've been taught from a young age that our sense of self comes from caretaking for others, well, guess who we attract? We attract people who need to be taken care of, right? So we got to heal that part of ourselves. We got to heal that part of ourselves that desperately wants to take care of others so we can get X, Y, and Z needs met. Okay, what are those needs? What are your X, Y, and Z? Because we need to learn how to start to heal those parts of you and start to learn how to get those needs met in healthy ways, right? That's the journey of healing codependency. It's learning how to start to get the needs met that we want met, that make us feel good, done in healthy ways. Wounded people attract caregivers who find value and worth in caring for others, usually at the expense of their sense of self. So this what I mean by wounded people is narcissistic people. They will attract caregivers who find value and worth in caring for others, usually at the expense of their sense of self. So that means that the empath is willing to expend their sense of self, which is abandon their sense of self, to care for others because they're getting some sort of need met. Again, we got to identify what that need is. Secure and authentic people don't need to be taken care of because they take care of themselves, so they don't attract narcissistic people or caretakers. So that's a huge red flag for me. Okay, now knowing, because this has been me, this was me. I was a caretaker my whole life, and I had to do some deep work to get to a place where I had to heal my codependency and I had to stop caretaking in unhealthy ways. And you can imagine how hard that transformation was for me, because I do this for a living. So I had to be like healing my codependency while at the same time caretaking for others, because I do that for a profession, right? So in order to get to that place where we're secure and authentic, we need to be willing to to be aware of when we're attracting these people. Okay. So huge red flag if you're attracting somebody who needs you to take care of them. Okay. Huge red flag. People that are secure and healthy should be able to take care of themselves. And that does not mean that they can't rely on you or lean on you for support, but that you should not be their primary source for support if they're not supporting themselves. Okay. That bleeds into codependency. Okay. So this is where it gets a little bit activating for some people. So taking self-responsibility. And I want to just note here that, narcissistic abuse and narcissistic relationships are really traumatizing. Okay. They are really traumatizing, and we attract them into our lives for a reason. I always attribute spiritual meaning to everything. And I think people attract people into their lives for a reason, but that does not make it okay. All right. And I know that a lot of people watching this are going to be people who have been victims of narcissistic abuse. And that's really painful. I really want to validate that. And I've been through relationships where that has occurred, and it's really hard, and it's really hard to heal from it. But we got to take self-responsibility. Okay. If we want the pattern of attracting these people to end, we got to take responsibility for ourselves and our own healing. We're attracting these people because we're not healed. That's why. Okay. So instead of blaming the narcissist, we need to look at what we have to learn from attracting someone of this personality structure. Why are we attracting these people? And I've spoken to it throughout this whole workshop, is that we're attracting them because we learned in our childhood that we get value out of taking care of people. We get a sense of purpose and identity out of taking care of people, right? So that's why we're likely attracting them. So we got to get curious about the following. How can we take responsibility for our healing instead of dating wounded and toxic people and trying to fix them? Okay, because we're playing out a pattern from childhood that is alleviating the symptoms of what needs to be healed, but it's not actually healing us. It's not getting to the root. Okay, so dating people and playing out the dynamic, it might feel somewhat soothing in the moment, but then it always activates you again, right? So if we want to stop the pattern, we got to go down into the root, and we got to start working with the part of us that's wounded and the part of us that needs healing. So what does my attraction to narcissists say about what needs to be addressed within myself? Right? Great questions to ask yourself. How can I strengthen my sense of self so I don't need toxic people to help me define my sense of self? This is the development of the authentic self. This is what I do for a living. I help people develop their connection to their sense of self in an authentic way, so they can start to understand who they are, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their fears and insecurities are. And it really is. It's like going back to that part of you in childhood where you got stunted, and saying, okay, let's start the journey now. Let's start from that young age, and let's really start to get into, who am I? What do I want? What do I need? Why am I looking for my identity outside myself, right? So it's important to note that manipulation goes both ways. Like I said, narcissistic people, this is a huge characteristic of theirs. They manipulate, they exploit. But empaths also manipulate, right? So caretaking for others, you know what a lot of empaths do, disempowered empaths, is they create things to caretake for. So they'll manipulate and they'll throw their partner off so they can care for them, right? It's also very manipulative. So we got to look at how are we showing up in our relationships. If you look at yourself as the victim, you will not be able to take responsibility for your healing, right? And this is what I see constantly is my ex was an asshole, my ex was this, and my ex was narcissistic and blah, 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 blah. And blaming the other person for all of our pain, okay? But why were we attracting this person? What did we do in the relationship that kept us staying in the relationship? Right? Why did we not exit the relationship? So there's lots of things here that need to be addressed. Disempowered empaths need to be needed to feel valuable and worthy. Again, it's very codependent. Empathy without boundaries can be just as toxic as narcissism. And this is my personal opinion, right? When we are misusing our empathy, it can be just as toxic for us, on us, as the narcissistic person is on us. So again, that's why responsibility taking is so important, because if we're misusing our empathy, we are porous. We're keeping ourselves exposed to people taking advantage of us, hurting us, manipulating us, exploiting us, right? So what are you doing to make others need you so you can feel valuable? Again, this is the manipulative side of the empath. What are we doing to make others need us? Right? Because that, again, is perpetuating the cycle of the toxic and trauma bonding relationship. Okay, so how the law of attraction is always working in your favor for your greatest spiritual evolution. Like I said earlier, I always attribute meaning to everything in my life. All suffering has meaning in our lives. And I'm a firm believer that we attract it. We attract it as a way to help ourselves heal, grow, and evolve. So we're always attracting who we need in our lives for our highest spiritual evolution. Our relationships are always mirroring back to us the places within ourselves that need to be healed and loved. So when we exit these narcissistic relationships, we have to go through a pretty big healing journey, right? Well, what showed us that what needed healing? What showed us that needed to be loved, right? It was the toxic relationship. It really pinpointed what we need to focus on, right? So again, was brought into our lives for a reason. And a really cool sign of growth, because I've been down this path, I was attracting all sorts of people that were unhealthy for me. And, a sign of my growth is now I'm attracting healthy people. I'm attracting people with secure attachment styles. I'm attracting people who value me and care about my needs. Because, again, relationships that come into our life are always mirrors of where we're at in our relationship with ourselves. Okay, so if we don't value and we don't love ourselves, well, guess what? We're going to attract somebody who doesn't value or love us too. And it's just highlighting our own inner experience. So narcissists are teaching us how to stand more in our truth, believe more in ourselves, and have a strong sense of worthiness. I know for a lot of people, it's hard to grasp that, but in the end, in retrospect, when you look back at those relationships, you'll be able to say this. If you're in one right now, you're probably like, that does not make any sense, right? And that's actually probably insulting to hear. But I promise you, as you move away from these toxic containers, you'll start to realize this truth. Okay, so I want to teach you guys a bit about the relationship attachment model by Dr. John Van Epp. And this is just really good for people on the high empathy spectrum. So whether you're a highly sensitive person or you're an empath, it's really important to know this, because this is a model that's used to help people heal codependency. Because codependency, one of the characteristics is rushing into relationships, making somebody your everything and only knowing them for a couple months, right? So what he does is he's broken down the stages of relationship attachment in a healthy way that can really help people move towards relationships in a way that they won't get swept up in them and they won't lose their sense of self. That's really what this is about. So the first thing is to know bonding with someone and getting to know them, right? So I have a rule when I'm getting to know somebody is I won't commit to anybody for the first 3 months. I want to know who somebody is because I often find in my own personal experience that people don't show up authentically for the first 3 months. And then after 3 months, you're like, wait a minute, this person isn't who they said they were. That happens to me constantly because people lead with their best foot, right? They hold back all their insecurities, all their fears. And then after 3 months, they start to bring these forward. And a lot of times it's unconsciously, people can't hold them back anymore, right? Because their emotions start to get involved. So really get to know somebody before you start dating them or committing yourself to them. The next one is trust. So the more you know the person, the more you can truly trust them, right? So know has to come before trust for this reason. And a huge characteristic of trust is going to be consistency and transparency over time. That's how trust is developed, right? Somebody's consistent, right? So if someone's inconsistent and they text you, 12 times one day and then they don't text you for 3 days, like that's a huge red flag, right? So inconsistencies are going to be big red flags for people. The next one is rely. So reliance grows from the ways you meet another person's needs and how they meet your needs. We can only rely on someone after we trust them. Okay. So if we're getting to know somebody and we start relying on them before we have actually fully gotten to know them and fully trust them, guess what happens? The anxious attachment gets activated. We start to, worry and wonder what they're doing and that sort of thing because we don't have trust, right? Because we've jumped over a step, which trust takes time, right? So slowing down your relationships is going to be so key for you if you're somebody that gets into codependent relationships or you have an anxious attachment style or a fearful avoidant attachment style. Really important. The next one is commit. So the extent to which you feel a sense of belonging in the relationship is going to be a sign that it's okay to commit, right? If you feel a sense of belonging, and belonging is like this person they understand my needs and they meet my needs and I can fully be my authentic self with them, then we commit, okay? So, but think about your relationships. Like how often have you gone from no to commit and you've just skipped over trust and rely? Okay. This is big stuff. The last one is touch. So sexual or intimate touch that contributes to the feeling of closeness in a relationship. And for a lot of people, you think about like one night stands, you think about these things, and this is one model. Okay, so this might not work for everybody. For me, this is really important because I am a demisexual, and I'm a firm believer that sex with somebody is extremely intimate. There's an exchange of DNA. There's an exchange of energy. So this person's energetic being, which encompasses their shadows, their trauma, their everything, you're sharing that with them, right? And I'm a highly sensitive, empathic person, so I'm absorbing a lot constantly. So for me, this is a great order, and it works really well for me. And it doesn't have to be like a timeline of like a year. Like I'm not going to have sex with you for a year. For some people that would work, but it can be getting to know somebody over time, and it can slowly start to build. Okay. So some journaling questions for you guys. I'm going to post these in the comments or in the descriptor below, but I'll read them out to you guys. So why do I feel the need to move so fast in my relationships? How well do I know the person I am in a relationship with? How well do I know what their needs are? And will they respond to me and care for my needs as I care for them? What needs went unmet for me as a child? How am I getting these needs met now? These are like super potent. Okay, super potent. So use these. They're really powerful. I used these questions over the course of my healing codependency journey, and they were very powerful for me. So a couple more. How can I slow down the pace of my relationships so I can truly spend the quality time getting to know somebody? How do I, and like for that those are tangible things. Like, do I need to set boundaries? Do I need to let the person know, like, let's pump the brakes a little bit? You know what I mean? Like, I really want to take this slow. What does that look like for you? Get clear about that. How do I make myself valuable in my relationships? Right? That's going to be like can probably lead into fawning, right? As a trauma response, people pleasing. Like, do I overgive myself? Do I take over responsibility for things? Do I pay for my partners to do everything and they don't pay for anything. Like there's lots of things that can come up in that space. What am I doing in my relationships to make my partners need me? Again, that's the codependency for the empath. The empath, we make our partners need us. And so does the narcissist, actually. Narcissistic people will do that as well, too. So really important to make note of that. So some resources to support your transformation. So I have a podcast called Inspired to be Authentic. That is a really great resource to check out. It's pretty much on all the podcast platforms. I interview a lot of really great people on that. This YouTube channel. So I have a ton of videos on healing codependency, doing inner child work, healing shame, perfectionism, like all these things that are contributing to that. And, you know, the codependency playlist is probably a good place to start. And Instagram. So again, I have a lot of, if you like more short form content, written content, my Inspired to be Authentic Instagram is a great place for that. And then if you're wanting to do some deeper work, I have a workshop, 8-week workshop called Authentic Relating and Empowerment for Highly Sensitive People. Empaths are also a great fit for this workshop as well, where we go deep and we talk about emotion regulation, how to emotionally regulate, how to heal trauma, how to relate authentically. So this workshop was basically built for this type of stuff. It's like perfect. After taking that workshop, I guarantee you're not going to be attracting narcissistic people into your life. And then some cited resources. So again, Dr. Ramani is a great resource. She has a video called Why Authenticity is the Anecdote to Narcissism, or to Attracting Narcissists. That's this video. Again, I'll post it in the link below. The RAM attachment model, there's a lot more information about that. And it was done over a podcast, I believe, that I retrieved some of this information. So I will put that in there. And then the DSM criteria for narcissism, where I got that from, I will also put the link in the descriptor box. So yeah, thanks for chiming in, or for paying attention to this, because I think it's really important. And I would love to hear your thoughts, opinions, maybe any resources that you have. So drop some comments in the comment section, because I would love to hear from you guys. All right. Take care. Much love.